Today we're starting our new book, The Adventures of Nanny Piggins, and it's written by someone called R.A. Spratt. So the first chapter is called Nanny Piggins and Her Dramatic Entrance. Mr. Green desperately needed to find a new nanny for his children. In the 4 weeks since their last nanny left, he found himself actually having to talk to them, provide them with meals, and pay attention to them himself. All this just had to stop. He had a job at a law firm helping rich people avoid paying their taxes. He couldn't be expected to look after his children as well. The reason Mrs. Green didn't look after the children because she was not there. Mr. Green said she'd died in a boating accident, but the children weren't entirely sure of this. You see, yes, there had been a funeral, and yes, there had been an obituary in the paper, but people on television programs died all the time, and it never stopped them from coming back in the next series. So they had not totally given up hope that their mother had just got fed up with their father, which was something they could fully understand. There were 3 Green children. The eldest, Derek, was a fit boy of 11. He was always suntanned or muddy. Either way, he always looked brown. And he always had long messy hair but never went to the hairdressers because the only time his father ever spoke to him was to yell, "Go and get your hair cut, you look like a scruff bag." The second child, Samantha, was a girl, and as such had even fewer conversations with her father. She was a nice girl and pretty enough, but not so much as to cause a fuss. Her chief characteristic was she worried all the time. To be fair, she did have a lot to worry about. The third child, Michael, was only 7, but in many ways he was the most confident. He couldn't remember his mother at all, so he wasn't saddened or worried about her loss. Derek and Samantha bore the brunt of having to deal with Mr. Green, so Michael was able to get on with his life unhindered. And as a result, he was on the tubby side, because his favourite hobby was stealing food from the kitchen and then sitting and eating it under the bushes in the garden. On the whole, they were 3 well-mannered children, and they would have been a doddle for anyone to look after. Mr. Green should have found a nanny in half a second flat. But there was a problem. Not only did Mr. Green believe that rich people should not have to pay taxes, he also believed that he personally shouldn't have to pay for anything. He begrudgingly gave money to a nanny. In his opinion, childcare should be entirely government provided, paid for out of the taxes his clients never paid. But even more than that, Mr. Green deeply resented the idea that he had to pay to advertise for a nanny. There were so many unemployed people in the world that in his opinion, nannies should be beating down his door asking for a job. So despite the fact that he desperately wanted a nanny, he didn't have one because he was too cheap to put an advertisement in the newspaper. All Mr. Green had done was paint a sign himself with the words "Nanny Wanted, Inquire Within," and attached it to a stake and banged it in the front lawn. So far, the sign had sat there for 3 whole weeks without a single knock on the door. So now the pressure was really on. One of the neighbours, watching Michael sitting under the bush eating frozen pizza, had reported this to the government, and a social worker had arrived to inspect the 3 children. She then made an appointment to see Mr. Green, because he, of course, was out at work when she visited, and threatened him. She told him that if he continued to leave his children unattended for 10 or 12 hours at a time, they would be taken away and put into government care. Now, Mr. Green would have liked nothing better than to have his children taken away. Goodness me. If that happened, then he wouldn't have to go home at all, and he could spend all his time at the office happily reading textbooks. But he knew that if his children were taken away from him, it would look bad indeed. People didn't think much of him anyway, but it would damage him professionally if the story got into the papers. So, this is at the point that our story begins. Mr. Green was so desperate to hire a nanny that he was actually considering paying to put an advertisement in the paper, when this painful thought was interrupted by a loud knock at the front door. It was a dark and stormy night. Rain was teeming down. As Mr. Green opened the door, he couldn't clearly see the person in front of him, silhouetted by the street light, but he could tell from the shape that the person was wearing a dress. So he assumed it was a woman, and he assumed she must have come about the nanny position. He was flooded with the relief. Come in, come in. As the new nanny stepped into the house, the light hit her, and Mr. Green could see her clearly for the first time. She wore a simple blue dress with a drop waist and a jaunty little jacket, and she was only 4 foot tall, which is even shorter than Mrs. Lovett. But Mr. Green soon forgot about her lack of height when he saw that she had a much more shocking feature. The woman wasn't a woman, she was a pig, a common pink farm pig, the type that bacon comes from. Good evening, I'm Nanny Piggins, said Nanny Piggins, the pig. Huh? Said Mr. Green. I've come to apply for the position of nanny. Spluttered Mr. Green. Well, that's very good, but I don't think you're very suitable. I can start immediately, said Nanny Piggins. I've got no criminal record. That's good, said Mr. Green, but I expect to be paid properly. Now that could be difficult, said Mr. Green. Here he saw he had a perfect excuse for not hiring the pig. I charge 10 cents an hour. You're hired, exclaimed Mr. Green without even thinking. He knew it was a bargain. I'll be frank, Nanny Piggins, I would prefer not to have a pig taking care of my children, but I am prepared to offer you the job until a suitable human nanny comes along. Very well, said Nanny Piggins. I think you'll find human nannies are terribly overrated. They are, in my experience, very greedy and not very clean. I shall agree to your terms, though, because it's wet outside and I do not have an umbrella. So Mr. Green and Nanny Piggins shook hands on it. Well, he shook hands and she shook a trotter. Then Mr. Green immediately fled out of the house to return to his office in the city, where leaving Nanny Piggins to acquaint herself with the children. Derek, Samantha and Michael stared at Nanny Piggins with their mouths open. It had never occurred to them in their greatest minds that their father might leave them in the care of a pig, no matter how well she was dressed. Hello, children. My name is Sarah Piggins, and I'm going to be your new nanny. I'm Derek. I'm Samantha. I'm Michael. Derek, Samantha and Michael, I shall do my best to remember that, she assured them. The children stared at her, and she stared at them for a long time before she cleared her throat and said, So what's supposed to happen now? Well, this is the part where you tell us what you expect of us, Derek told her. He was quite experienced at that, having had 11 different nannies in his short life. Oh, I didn't realise I was supposed to have expectations so early in the piece. Give me a moment to think of some, said Nanny Piggins. They watched her as she thought. Okay, I'm ready, she announced. Well, you don't have to tell your father this, but I will admit I've never been a nanny before. My only previous job experience was a flying pig in the circus, which I am proud to say I was very good at, and I don't suppose that nannying can be any harder than being blasted out of a cannon. So I shouldn't be surprised if I turn out to be rather good at this. The children stared at Nanny Piggins in awe. They didn't know what to think. They were astonished that she was a pig, but a flying pig? A flying pig that had no idea of how to be a nanny? They must be the luckiest children in the world. It was Nanny Piggins who interrupted their joyful thoughts. So I've told you my expectations. What am I supposed to do next? She asked. The children considered all the things their father would suggest. Well, you could go and tell us to tidy our rooms, suggested Derek. Or tell us to have a shower, added Samantha. Or tell us to shut our mouths if we know what's good for us, said Michael. Oh, said Nanny Piggins. Well, you can do all of that if you like, but I'm going into the kitchen to go through the cupboards and looking for things that contain sugar. Then eat as much as I can until I feel sick. You can join me if you like. And they did. The children soon fell deeply in love with their new nanny. She let them stay up half the night watching movies and then let them sleep in her bed the other half of the night when they had nightmares about the violent movies they'd just watched. She let them eat chocolate not only before and after breakfast, but instead of breakfast as well. As far as they were concerned, she was the best nanny in the entire world. The only cloud on their horizon was the Nanny Wanted sign in the front garden, for their father still held out the hope that he would eventually be able to upgrade to a human nanny, and the children lived in dreadful fear of that day. So that's the first chapter of our new book, and the next chapter is called Nanny Piggins and the Best Day Ever. Let me know what you think of this story so far.